I want to welcome everyone to the Emerging Technology and the Federal Emergency Response Compliance and Risk Management Forum, or Tech Forum. This morning, I'm going to speak to you about the activities in which the Veterans Affairs and COVID. One thing I can say in any emergent situation, organizations really come together. The Department of Veterans Affairs Office of Information Technology learned long-term digital transformation strategy, ready IT and mobile solutions that are secure, accessible, expandable, and reliable. Made a big difference for VA and veterans in the COVID-19 pandemic. Throughout the pandemic, we have ramped up and scaled quickly to address the department's surging IT needs. VA OIT quickly established 10 key work streams, scrums, teams providing an all-hands approach between development, security, and operations experts. Our teams accomplished in weeks what we would typically had required months or most of a year. Doubling our VPN and CAG, tripling our telehealth capacity, adding over 100,000 mobile devices and 225,000 laptops. The VA today services 430,000 employees and 9.4 million veterans daily. We supported a rapid shift to a new business model for VA, helping employees provide care to veterans from wherever they are, some 24/7. Two key areas of support we expanded were telework and healthcare. We rapidly procured and delivered equipment to support increased telework as well as increased mobility in clinicians and emergency COVID requirements. To give you a little bit about the 10 different initiatives. On our telework expansion, OIT doubled its capacity from the virtual private network gateway, quadrupling the capacity of our Citrix gateway to accommodate our remote workers. More than doubled the number of unique remote users from 43,900 in February to 133,700 in June. We also quadrupled our virtual service and our Citrix support from 1,700 to 7,600. We have not exceeded capacity as of today. We have more than doubled our VPN and our Citrix gateway capacity. We went from 120,000 users in February to over 500,000 in this present time. We went from 16,000 in February to 150,000 users simultaneously today for our CAG. For pre-COVID, we only had about 16,000 unique connections a day that we were experiencing. And now we're roughly up to 134,000 telework unique connections. Not only did we have to implement and look at ways to incorporate rapid response, we also had to look at creating abbreviated telework schedules. We had to create a rapid response for authorization. In our authorization process, we altered our FedRAMP requirements and our customer controls. We conducted risk assessments on the fly to make sure and ensure that we were not compromising our veterans information and our VA data networks. We began incorporating TIC 3.0 and Zero Trust in most of our solutions. We brought up multiple teams and working hundreds of people daily to make sure that all the things that I just talked about were successful. Give me 1 second. 1 second. Okay. Sorry, guys, my granddaughter is here. So the other things that we were able to do at VA as an agency was we start beginning to look at a holistic approach for combining people, processes, and technologies to respond to and address identified risks. There are several areas in which we had to assume some level of risk, but we also increase our visibility across the VA environment. We band together with our cybersecurity services to ensure that at all times we have visibility. We restructured some of our networks and we did some development in our operational environments. But at all times, ensuring that we remain and have visibility from end to end. One area, multiple areas in which we benefit is now that we were able to really do some deep dives into our TIC 3.0 use cases, where we currently have 9 use cases that we support and we continue to work. You'll hear a little bit more about that during our panel discussions. Let me give you an idea of the workload in which we were able to do. For our COVID response initiatives, my team in itself, we worked 1,523 hours. Collaboratively with our mission partners, we worked 3,600 hours within the last few months. We in our TIC use cases, we created baselines off of Office 365 as a way to measure how we're going to incorporate our PEPs across the environment. We included telehealthcare services using AWS AppStream, using CAG expansion, using Office 365, incorporating and looking at and assessing VPN as a service, remapping our architectures and our designs, but continue to remain and introduce visibility. We've introduced bring your own device to our environment using Microsoft ATP services and other applications. We're fully taking advantage of our CASB tool to make sure that the things that we may miss and using from our TIC 2.2 and our TIC 3.0 solutions, making sure that our CASB is used as a backup. We currently have 19 COVID cloud software as a services running simultaneously and also authorizing. We have 7 projects for remote access, looking at ways to implement Okta, IDME, Workspace, AppStream, WVD. So one thing I will also tell you that our security experts and our teams will becoming an expert in all these different applications and capabilities. I think that we have performed and we excel in working together as a team and as one. The VA right now has and that will be able to support and address any pandemics in the near future. In the end, we're still going to have to go back and relook and rethink and fully implement FedRAMP for those application solutions that are going to remain online. We're in the process of prioritizing those solutions. We have multiple applications that I know that you guys are using. Some of them are Planeteer, ServiceNow, SCMC, Cisco WebEx, Splunk, Zoom, Lookout, WebHigh, Accenture. So there's so many new solutions that we're put online to continue to support our telehealth and our healthcare services, while we continue to merge our medical records and sharing efforts with DHA and the Department of Defense. The COVID activities did not preclude us, restrain us from continuing to work the day-to-day activities that are high priorities, not only to the Secretary, but to Congress and to our veterans. I can say thus far, I have not seen a lag in our systems or the capabilities, in our current capabilities. I think that VA and others, we strive to do what we need to do, and we strive to work together as one as we continue to support our workforce and our veterans to ensure that our healthcare workforce have what they have at their fingertips. And that's all I have. I think I have 9 minutes.
Hello, everyone. My name's Tom Suter. I'm the founder of the Advanced Technology Academic Research Center. And we're here today with Peter Steyert, who's Senior Solution Engineer over at Gigamon. How are you doing today, Peter?
Not too bad. How about yourself?
Good, good. Looking forward to your presentation.
Sounds good. So as we look at, today's challenges, right? What happens when increased VPN traffic is looping through the network, right? That is a big situation that we're seeing today as we go through today's issues that exist with many employees being forced to work from home or work remote based upon the current environment. Why split tunneling limits security awareness, and why it leaves a giant blind spot within the security holes, and then how to effectively disseminate data to both security and network operation teams in real time to reduce tool overload during this situation. So as we look at this, right, prior to the situation that's going on in the world today, as well as anytime we shift significantly to a remote work environment, whether it's from a policy perspective or unforeseen circumstances, we generally have very limited traffic that's coming in from the VPN. This is done through many ways, where a lot of times there's not a lot of concern through this VPN traffic, or you pull data off of a span port and you're not really worried about oversubscription of this data. I've had a customer in the real world that actually ran into this situation where they weren't really observant of their VPN traffic or weren't critical of it, and we're just pulling like span traffic from it and sending over to a visibility platform such as Gigamon to get that data both to the network operation tools or NetOp tools, as well as the security operation tools, right? Most of the traffic was coming from, on-premise users. Those were accessing both internal assets such as organizational servers, VM server farms and such, as well as external traffic through to the internet and other assets abound, such as anything that resides in the cloud. So the VPN concentrator overall was pretty significantly and light loaded. What we have seen overall as this work from home shift has occurred is VPN concentrators have been oversubscribed, causing many organizations to either double or triple the requirements for VPN concentrators. The external traffic now is significantly higher than anything on-premise. In fact, a lot of organizations have reduced on-premise traffic to minimal, while at the same time, these organizations don't want to allow for split tunneling. What split tunneling is the outside or users, such as the remote users, are coming in through a VPN, but the only traffic that is routed through the VPN is traffic bound for internal organizational servers. While this is significant in reducing the amount of traffic over the VPN, it does leave a gaping security hole, and the fact that it doesn't allow visibility into how the users are accessing the internet and possible threat vectors that are coming in from there. Likewise, a lot of these assets may or may not be owned by an organization, and as such, controlling the traffic as it's coming in and out of the organization is even more important. So by creating a visibility fabric within an organization that includes the availability of monitoring that external traffic is significant, while at the same time reducing the traffic to the tools through things like data deduplication. So this is done in a manner so that the data coming in from a VPN that may be routed back out to the internet is not duplicated to the tools. So the cybersecurity tools aren't seeing this multiple times as traffic coming in from the VPN from a tap or span location, as well as data going back out through the firewall to the internet, right? So this data needs to be deduplicated and then sent to the security operations and the network operation tools. So again, making it more efficient while ensuring that the analysts who need to access this data from a cybersecurity perspective are even more effective. So as this has occurred, right, the external traffic is increasing, the internal traffic is decreasing significantly from an on-premise user perspective, but there is the same amount of people accessing the organizational servers. They're just accessing it from outside of normal methodology that we have seen in the past. So as this moves forward, and we move beyond where we are today, right, we're going to probably see more and more organizations can continue to work from home or have flexible capabilities of working remote. So the availability of monitoring this VPN traffic is significantly more important. So the legacy approach of looking at network visibility is significant, right? You're looking at span ports, multiple data points of entry, and going from there. Really what you want to do is create a central point of visibility fabric, taking all the data, running it into a single point, and then sending it to all the tools, deduplicating the data, and transforming it into a manner in which the tools are more effective. Thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Hello all. Hopefully everyone can hear me out there. My name is Jill Toro. I'm executive editor at Sightline Media, where I oversee a few of our business to government brands, Defense News, C4ISR Net, Fifth Domain, which is our cyber focused group. I am here to moderate a terrific panel. We're going to kick it off and have each of our speakers give a few introductory remarks, and then from there I will incorporate some questions and hopefully we'll get everything covered. So I'm going to start off and have John Fabus say a few words. He's Chief Information Security Officer at NRC. Welcome, John.
Hi, thanks for having me. At the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, we've been making a lot of changes over the past 18 months that have actually made COVID-19 a little bit easier for us to handle. We've been moving away from providing people with desktops to moving towards secure laptops. And even though our prior record for telework at one time was 20% of staff on a weather emergency day, we're now routinely at 98 or more % of staff coming in remotely through one of our modes of remote access, VPN, remote desktop, bring your own device. We have been making do with using more cloud services, which allows us to focus more on securing our data rather than securing and administering hosts. Which has been a huge change for us, and it's allowed us to turn from suppliers of services to consumers of services, which gives us a very different structure when we're looking at securing and managing our services. We've also been able to be a lot more agile. The cloud providers in the FedRAMP realm have been moving things into their FedRAMP tenancies much faster than we have in the past, which gives us the ability to try new services out quickly. And it gives us the ability to figure out how we want to assess them, how to figure out the risk. So we've given the ability for some of our staff to test things in the tenant before we roll it out to the larger community. And I also want to give a shout out to CDM. Continuous Diagnostics and Mitigation has been a fantastic program for us. It's allowed us to formalize how we're using our tools to ensure that we've got a consistent tool base across the enterprise and to make sure we have a wide view of what's going on to secure our data and our devices so we can quickly prioritize and mitigate. Again, thanks for having me, and look forward to the rest of the chat.
Great, thank you so much. Next, we're going to hear from Jack Jones, who is chairman of the FAIR Institute. Jack.
Hi, thank you for having me. Yeah, as a 3-time CISO and now as someone who tries to help the industry and organizations within our industry sort of continue to evolve our risk measurement and management practices. Over the last few months, colleagues of mine and I have been helping organizations deal with the rapid changes that everyone's had to go through to handle work from home and whatnot by helping them evaluate the risk landscape quantitatively so that they can, and when I say quantitatively, analyzing their loss exposure in dollars and cents, right? So that they can make important trade-offs between sort of the response the organizations have to put into place to achieve, continue to operate as businesses and as organizations, and yet do so well-informed in terms of how much risk they're taking on with their choices and what kind of control opportunities they have that will be most cost effective. and really it's that need to be cost effective, especially today with the economy being what it is, that many organizations are having to tighten their belts. And so in that mode of operation, it's especially important that organizations make good choices about which belts they tighten most, and especially, I would argue, within the cyber and technology risk management space, because if the CFO comes knocking on the door and asks or states, your budget has just been cut by 20%, and we've heard from many CISOs who had a message very much like that from their CFOs. Where are you going to cut out of all of the controls within your portfolio? Which things matter most? Now, everyone has an opinion on that, but until you actually measure that quantitatively, it's hard to have a lot of confidence in some of the choices, and there can be some surprises in terms of the results when you compare sort of what your intuition might tell you versus what an analysis tells you. So really, that's been a huge focus for us over the last several months, is helping organizations get a more quantitative and business-focused view on the prioritization and other choices they're faced with making.
Great. Thank you so much for that. We're going to dig in, needless to say, dig into a lot of these topics more once we hear from all the speakers. Those who have been with us for a few moments did hear from Royce Allen. She's Director of Enterprise Security Architecture at the VA. But Royce, why don't you introduce yourself for folks who might have just joined and perhaps say a few words?
Hi, I'm Royce Allen. I'm the Chief Security Architect and the Director of Enterprise Security Architecture at the VA. My team has been working closely with others to ensure that we put special emphasis and focus on architecture design in light of the COVID activities. We've been revamping and reorganizing certain processes, tailoring them so that we can get solutions out very quickly. If you heard me earlier, I talked about the expansion of the VA networks from telework to telehealth. I spoke about taking fully advantage of the TIC 3.0 use cases and services in order to meet our growing needs. We have a huge role in providing services for telehealth on the commercial side. So TIC 3.0 really guidelines help us really look at how do we connect cloud to clouds, how do we manage our resources between clouds, as a part of our extension of the VA network. We've already completed 3 TIC 3.0 use cases. We have been keeping DHS and OMB abreast of those activities and how we're developing our processes and mapping our requirements. We continue to have 7 TIC 3.0 mapping development efforts that are ongoing. We have 2 TIC 3.0 use cases that have received ATO authorizations. Again, we have simultaneously worked 14 COVID activities since February and to date. We have 7 remote access projects that are ongoing. Some have been completed. We have 12 related risk assessments that were conducted. We use our risk assessments to identify critical shortfalls of dependencies, and we also use those to leverage internal resources, not only from CDM, but for other capabilities that may come with Microsoft Azure or Amazon AWS Cloud Suite. We continue to deploy and expand our CASB capabilities. We have seen, some slowdown in some of our work and our initiative, but we continue to do our best and service our telehealth and our healthcare workforce so that they can service our veterans. whether it's remotely or in some of our facilities. We continue to look at providing capabilities and proof of concepts for our research environment. And we continue to move and quickly to address whatever our CIO, Secretary, and Healthcare Services priorities are. And you'll hear a little bit
Great.
more
Thank you.
of what we're doing.
Absolutely. Terrific. And finally, we have John Fangay. He's Public Sector Chief Technology Officer from Micro Focus. John, thanks for being here.
Thanks so much. It's great to be here. So ensuring applications are securely performing well is perhaps every agency's most critical requirement, and that spans the entire DevSecOps process. Often we find agencies have many tool sets and processes across the organization, which, given the situation and requirements at any program's initiation, lead to a lot of differences and challenges in creating a unified view of your true real-time vulnerability view. And you don't want every team obviously inventing different functions and processes and then hope to resolve them all and understand where you are, perhaps only seeing some of those situations at the ATO process. Micro Focus is heavily involved in most of the open standard development, and we support almost every major software product in the open source arena. Since you need enterprise vulnerability and scalability for compliance and risk, you obviously need enterprise products that can span and support all the tools out there, open source or commercial. Otherwise, you'll spend a lot of time and energy stitching the information together and hoping that you've got a complete and real-time view of what your true vulnerabilities are. Finally, addressing compliance and vulnerabilities in the DevSecOps processes as an organization wide can lead you toward the path to zero outage for your systems. And that's the topic of my upcoming session. So thanks so much.
Great. Thank you all so much. So we have a lot to touch on here. Needless to say, COVID is the topic of the day, the month, the year so far. So I do want to kind of key into that quite a bit. And if you really think about what all agencies and companies for that matter are dealing with right now, there's a management internally of being able to do your job, being able to access the systems that you need in a new environment, an adapted workforce and so forth. And then there's also, in some cases, being able to provide the services to citizens and customers that you always have in the past. So I think it's important to touch on both of those things. I wanted to start with kind of actually a funny scenario, and I don't know if this was faced by ATARC at all with this event, but we host a number of events with government speakers, defense speakers, and something we found is has been a challenge is ensuring that they feel they have the certification to use certain platforms, web conferencing platforms, and so forth. A lot of it was whether or not the government agency was allowed access, had the certification and the permissions they need, and we've been getting different stories from different agencies. So, it's an interesting example of, having to deal with this situation in an environment and circumstances that the government hasn't dealt with before. So, John, I'm going to start with you. Have you, faced situations for yourself, for the workforce, or seen at NRC situations where you had to kind of figure it out as you went along in terms of the kind of technology you were capable of using, and what helped in that? I know FedRAMP was mentioned and so forth. Like, how are you ensuring you have access to the tools that you need under these new circumstances? Uh-oh, you might be muted. Are we able to? There you are, I hear you.
So the first focus is on the data that we're using. We want to make sure that whatever solution we're using is appropriate to secure the data that we have. We have our own video conferencing and collaboration platforms that we're using through FedRAMP. We've gone through authorization and assessment and made sure that they meet the risk profile for the data that we would want to present. However, when we work with other agencies, when we work with our licensees, when we work with our external partners, they sometimes have limitations, as we do, about what platforms they can use. So we've gone through a discussion before those meetings or sometimes during those meetings to say, okay, who is there? Are all the people who are part of this meeting approved for access to this information? Is this information appropriate for presentation outside of the agency? Are we sharing it with the appropriate crowd? And once we get a positive determination or a negative determination for that, then we can talk about who is there that shouldn't have access to that, and how do we meet the need? Do we change how we discuss the data? Do we change the inclusion of some data? Or is it appropriate that everyone there hears what we have to say? So we've been working with a lot of entitlement.
Okay, we might have a technological challenge for a quick moment. I'm going to give John, we lost John for a sec. I'm going to give him a quick moment to return. And we can always jump on back to him. There he is. I see you, John. Are you still there?
I'm still here.
All right. Okay. If you wanted to finish up what you're saying, we only lost you for maybe about 10 seconds.
So as long as we've got the data and the people covered, then we can make those determinations to ensure that we have the appropriate requirements met. And then we do this on the fly a lot to make sure our entitlements work with what our partners are using.
Yeah. It's interesting because it requires a US CISO have the authority to do so, but it does, I imagine, require an ability for government to incorporate some flexibility into the process, the authorizations, the approvals, and you know, for every agency, it might be a little different. It's kind of a whole new world in that sense. Do you see that your partners across government, are those authorizations, flexibility increasing a little bit for that?
With a variety of other organizations, yes. There are some types of data that you have to be much more careful with. For example, PII, not going to go into classified information, but other forms of CUI that are CUI high as opposed to the standard CUI, we typically don't have many problems with, and we try to keep it from being presented in systems that we don't have a lot of experience with.
Yeah, makes sense. Great. Jack, I wanted to kind of follow up that with you a bit in terms of looking a bit on this concept of managing risk, because you know, government has always faced this scenario of you can't eliminate risk entirely, needless to say. And so how much are you willing to accept? John spoke a little bit about that. It was a really interesting example. But do you have any thoughts in terms of the approach that agencies need to take, as well as partners need to take, to enable jobs to get done, work to get done, and accept a degree of risk in these circumstances?
Yeah, well, first of all, you're absolutely right. There is no free lunch. The decisions we make, the technologies we operate, conversations we have, all potentially introduce some amount of risk. And when we're in a contingency situation, such as we are with the pandemic, we very often have to make decisions very rapidly about complex things. And in those circumstances, you don't have time to do any sort of really deep analysis. And very often what you do is you sort of fall back on the standards that you operate from, right? The checklists and policies and such, which are there for a reason and to, you know, act as guardrails. And again, in a contingency, very often you're making decisions at least differently, if not the choices themselves being different, but the manner in which you approach them, again, tends to be much quicker and dirtier. And that's just an inevitable part of it. But there are some rules of thumb too with regard to risk and some common mistakes that organizations tend to make when evaluating risk, especially when it's quick and dirty, but even in normal circumstances. And you know, being able to avoid those pitfalls and more reliably understand how much loss exposure a potential decision or choice represents can be really important, again, especially when you're moving fast. So, for those of you who aren't aware, the factor analysis of information risk model, that framework, it's an open international standard for risk measurement, is something I developed almost 2 decades ago and have used, again, as a CISO and in helping other CISOs deal with sort of the normal decision-making challenges, but also situations such as this, where you're having to move very fast. And in those circumstances, it's especially easy to make errors in judgment with regard to how much risk some decision may represent or some choice. How much less risk will you have if you implement this control or that control? So it's again, the function of risk measurement within risk management is something that is beginning to evolve very rapidly, and is becoming much more quantitative in nature and sort of leaving the qualitative behind over time. It's not going to happen overnight. And qualitative arguably still has a place. But again, for the kinds of decisions we face, especially in circumstances like this, we have to be cognizant of the pitfalls and try to avoid those as much as possible.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting, a whole new world. Royce, you mentioned in your opening remarks this rapid surge in technology that was needed to enable the services that VA provides. There was technology purchases and so forth. It's interesting because so often government can have a challenge in terms of doing things fast, especially when it comes to procurement. So can you talk a bit about the enablement and how government, as well as the various contracts in place, enabled you to really get the technology and the services you needed fast? And are there lessons learned that maybe we could enable this more regularly in terms of the procurement system?
So I would say that we've really truly took fully advantage of our platinum licenses with Microsoft and with Amazon and Cisco. Especially on the Microsoft side, a lot of our solutions resided off of Microsoft 365 and its capabilities. Um, our goal was to be able to move the interaction between the veteran and our clinicians from the medical centers or the hospitals to their home. Um, Not in every scenario were we able to determine or dictate what video conferencing capability a veteran can use and not use. So it's going in and working with our privacy organization and our legal was, if a veteran has a capability, video telephone capability that has not been approved within a VA or even FedRAMP provision, we have to continue to have that conversation. So there are other things that we even adapted and we dialed in that we didn't have any security control over. But for those things that we did, we met regularly with the vendors. We made sure we understood everything that we needed to understand about that capability. Like some of the departments and agencies, we had the challenge of incorporating Zoom and looking at commercial Zoom versus government Zoom and what the risk would be. There are areas in which we have to assume the risk, or even on the commercial Zoom side. But we met closely with their architects and their engineers to talk about what were the restrictions, what other things we can put in place. We leverage the expertise of our engineers, our security architects, and we worked very closely together in the areas where we had to modify or accept certain level of risk from a security control standpoint. We took fully advantage of our technical capabilities. And a lot of times, your technical capabilities may go way beyond what you are already putting in place from a control standpoint. So taking and adapting compensating controls And to go back to what Jack said, putting together a rigorous risk assessment process and getting as much detail as we could, we were able to do that. But there was also some lessons learned. What COVID did offer to us is what there were some areas where we had to improve some of our workflows. We had to improve some of our communications between organizations and teams. We're putting together some lessons learned. We're looking at ways to improve certain things that we were doing prior to COVID, but we're also adapting certain practices that we put in place that we can benefit from. And I think having that diverse expertise and allowing those experts to get together and share their knowledge has helped us reduce the level of risk in which we and help inform risk decisions into our various authorizing officials. And I think I said earlier that the VA, we service veterans across the United States and in some foreign areas. We work closely with our DoD partners to make sure that some of the risk decisions that we were making and also taking fully advantage of reciprocity. There are areas where HSS or organizations have already looked at software as a service where we were able to benefit from their work. There are areas where DoD have their own cloud authorization processes where we've been able to leverage some of the things that they're doing to help speed up our processes. And so what we really learned was to really take fully advantage of the expertise and work very closely with our vendors, whether that's Salesforce, whether that's ServiceNow, Zoom, Microsoft Azure, but just really working with those experts, reaching out to OMB, asking questions to FedRAMP, where we're kind of trying to decide at what level of risk is we're assuming too much of a risk. So we use our resources just to make sure that the things that we're doing and the decisions that we're making are on point. So that's one of the areas, just taking full advantage of the resources that we have at our fingertips.
Great, great. And some really terrific points there that I'll probably return to. I do want to talk about some of the lessons learned in a moment. Before we jump there, though, John, I wanted to get your thoughts as a vendor in terms of the conversations you are having with government customers and partners and the need for flexibility, the need for you to kind of work with them to get to where they need to go. Have those been interesting conversations, and can you share a little bit about that?
Departments.
There you go. I might ask you to start over a bit. I think we're having some challenges with your sound. Let's give that another try.
Can you hear me?
I think I hear you now. Yes, yes.
Yeah, actually, it's been a very invigorating experience, honestly, for our product management people, because very often they don't quite understand how government users and citizens need our software to get paid, keep their job, apply for unemployment. But all eyes and all energy was brought to bear in SWAT teams around our major core products that are in use across 15 of 15 federal departments. And we released some emergency patches to deliver specific capabilities or improvements in a matter of days to benefit the federal, arena.
Right. Perfect. Yeah. Just what I was curious. I would imagine it's working on the fly to some degree, as much as possible. I do want to return to that topic that was meant. Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to return to some of the lessons learned. We have both the technological challenges that everybody has obviously been facing, but then there's also the issue of communication and figuring out how all of these companies can work with one another in an efficient way. So looking, perhaps starting with NRC, John, what were some of the challenges you faced, candidly? We're hearing a lot of success stories, and that's terrific from all of you. But what are some of the challenges you faced, and whether it be technological or whether it actually be in terms of process? And how did you overcome those? And then I guess the follow-up question for all of you will be, do you see any lasting lessons that will change how risk is managed and how workflow is achieved beyond COVID?
Certainly. From the beginning, there were some undefined or unexplained risks, things that we couldn't answer as we were trying to keep the business going. And the question there was, is it acceptable to have a bit of undefined or unknown risk? And could we accept that for a while to keep the business moving while we learn more about what was going on? And there were a couple of cases where we accepted that a meeting should go forward. We got a post-meeting discussion about what was discussed, how did we talk about what was there, and then we got more information about what was the technological basis of the meeting, and did we end up having a problem that we then had to figure out how to define and report on. The goal here was to keep things operating in the meantime, so we had to accept some risks that we really couldn't describe well. And the goal was to get better at figuring out what those risks were ahead of time, so we were able to be more proactive as we went into meetings. We've had some technological issues where we had tools that we were trying to work with that there was a plugin that wasn't part of our baseline desktop installation, or that we maybe had to have a user go and do something on their personal machine so that they could participate in the meeting. And we had to figure out how to describe that and what was the best path forward afterwards. So yeah, there was a lot of playing it by ear and trying to get better the next time.
Yeah, interesting. Royce, I'm going to jump to you because you made mention of this, but are there lasting shifts in terms of work processes that you think will stay with the organization? I mean, it seemed, from what you mentioned, it seemed that it was communication and some aspects that really go beyond product and technology. So if you could expand just a little bit on that, I'd love to hear it.
So I think one area in which I saw, even from a personnel standpoint, my team and others, we were working 12 plus hours a day. Um, and if you have kids at home or other folks, you're taking care of your parents, it was, kind of challenging for us. But we still understood the mission, and that the important mission was the veterans, and making sure that they had access to whatever they needed at their fingertips. One thing we saw was a huge surge in efforts that we were doing. We went from having 10,500 video calls to over 263,000 from March to May. So you that gives you an idea of the workloads and the efforts that were ongoing. We were working multiple solutions and initiatives at the same time to ensure that we had capacity at every level that you can think of, from a Citrix standpoint to VPN. One thing it required was us to have these daily scrums. Whether those daily scrums was us reporting in the morning and in the afternoon to our senior leadership on what we were at and what we were doing, or having those technical deep dives. One thing in which we didn't really have in place, but I think that we've used and we've piloted over and over and over, was having that rapid authorization process in place, or that rapid review of systems that may or may not have had any type of authorization. Educating and working with vendors who are small business owners who provide telehealth capabilities, and educating them on FedRAMP, what that means, creating a risk management process or an abbreviated approach or tailored approach for FedRAMP internally. That was one of the things we had to do. I think that's something that we're going to continue to leverage. I think every organization should have a rapid response process in place. Now we do. We're going to improve it, because we're going to go back and look at, some of the levels of risk that we have taken continue to evolve our capabilities in some of those areas, expanding our visibilities. We found, identify certain applications that we didn't even know that was available to us. So we was able to leverage those capabilities. And I'll take work, daily stand-ups, and I'll take technical calls. We invite all the vendors in which we have equities, involved. They participate in those conversations. So we didn't really, um, succumb to we need to have 4 or 5 separate meetings because we want to share technology or we don't want to share information. That did not become an issue. I say that everyone came in to play and to participate and to help the VA meet their growing needs. I'm looking at, some of our numbers where we went from 1,045% monthly increase in telehealth visits in January in 82 locations. We had tele ICUs. We had to make sure that, we have rural areas in which we were using satellite terminals. We had to start looking at how to incorporate, Wi-Fi, and did we have Wi-Fi capabilities, and was it going to be able to sustain, conversations for that, clinician, between that clinician and that veteran. We needed to make sure that we can still have access to prescriptions. And you guys know as well as I know, there are things that we can control as a result of COVID, but making sure that, in the areas where we did have veterans had to go into the facilities, making sure that software as a service where it looked at the, air purifications and making sure those things were operational. So there are a lot of things that we leverage. There are a lot of things that we took advantage of, but I will say that the vendors, the government workforce, our leadership, we all, came ready to operationalize and report.
That's great. What I find
Okay,
interesting about this whole conversation is we've spoken for years in this market about how, is there a need for procurement reform? Is there a need for better understanding of what agencies are already capable of doing? And I feel like COVID actually demonstrated, just how much flexibility does exist in the regulations to enable efficient and effective procurement of technology and processes and so forth. And I suppose if we're looking for a silver lining to some degree, that might be it. Jack, I want to come to you sort of on that topic where, we've seen a surge in technology buys, teleworking or workforce at home, which is something the federal government has always said it supported, but hasn't really gone full force in. What do you see from even a risk scenario? What do you see government potentially adopting for the long term? What lessons should they take out of this in terms of how they approach these scenarios?
Well, there are a couple of things. I think, as others have already talked about, a lot of the normal processes had to be flexible. And my experience, having been in the government for a number of years, was that sometimes processes feel unnecessarily burdensome and heavy and maybe over-engineered. And, in a circumstance like this, where we have to be flexible, we really have to get things done in a hurry, but still be intelligent in our approach. I think it's the perfect opportunity to examine sort of the normal protocols and say, okay, this seems, this faster, more flexible approach seems to be working okay, granted in unusual circumstances. Shouldn't we take a step back and look at maybe there are ways to streamline the protocols for normal circumstances so that we can be even more efficient, more effective going forward. So, I would like to think that things like procurement and, the review and approval processes for, all the kinds of decisions that had to be made, are that organizations take the time to say, okay, that worked in that circumstances, can it work in normal circumstances? And maybe there's something in the middle. And that's really where, from my perspective and my focus, risk analysis comes into play, because, we had to play fast and loose in an emergency. Maybe we wouldn't want to be quite that fast and loose normally, but probably there's a very real probability that that we can streamline from the previous protocols, but in doing so, sort of where do we draw the line? How much risk do we take when we make those choices about changing processes and such?
Absolutely. So we've spoken about COVID. I suspect we'll return to COVID, but I did, given the topic of our panels, compliance and risk management, that's something that all agencies and organizations are dealing with all of the time, pandemic or no pandemic. So I did want to touch on a couple other topics also. One is just kind of the security guidance and standards that so many of us go by. I know NIST actually did an update in March on special publication 853. I kind of just wanted to get a quick take maybe from John, as a CISO. I have to imagine this is something that you look at and you are mindful of. This was the first update in 7 years. What was notable to you, if you took anything away, and perhaps what was missing?
The 853 revisions over the years have been great steps forward. I'm very happy that this one has continued moving privacy into security, so that we're now talking about all the realms of data that we need to protect. But it's not so much a change as an evolution. We are looking at how we can simplify our assessment processes and consolidating some of the controls, or even breaking some of the controls out to say, here's an enhancement for when you're dealing with PII, here's an enhancement for when you're dealing with this type of information, and here's what you need to do in a cloud environment, are great steps forward for us. We are looking forward to getting this implemented in our automated GRC tools. We're priming our system owners, we're priming our ISOs to take a look at their system security plans and to see how we can change our processes going forward to better incorporate and anticipate the future changes that NIST is going to be making as they go through the next revision of 853. Which is not to say that it's going to take us some time to get to Rev 5. We're looking at the changes now, and it's going to be a while before we have all our systems updated.
Yeah, absolutely. Something that comes up all the time, and I did want to bring up, John, I might stick with you, but I might also bring this to some of the others as well, is looking at the supply chain. What we are seeing with COVID, obviously, is we're needing to adapt to tap technology in a hurry, services in a hurry. And I know the risk that folks have always pointed out is in that supply chain, whether the technology itself or whether the services being provided are meeting the standards that really government needs. Where, in terms of, for your own perspective, how should supply chain security be managed? Where does the liability fall? And do you feel comfortable, or we still have a ways to go? We hear about the risk so often.
We still have a ways to go. It's difficult for some agencies, and the NRC is not a large agency, to get that open source information collection, to even dig into the realm of closed source information collection about a number of vendors. So there are some things I'm going to be able to figure out, but as I get away from my core vendors to their subcontractors, and who's providing chip information and who's providing software updates to somebody like a Cisco or like a Dell that's building my ultimate machine, how deep do I need to dig into that puzzle to figure out what my real supply chain is? I know that Dell is my vendor for when I buy a piece of hardware, but what else should I be thinking about? It's getting to be a really complex question. And of course, picking the losers and not losers and winners, but picking the approved vendors is going to be a fraught process as we move forward. And I know agencies that are doing these government-wide access vehicles, the GWACs, are not wanting to say, well, this is the preferred vendor when they've got a number of suppliers on that contract that can be providing stuff. We need to be very careful as to how we look at this. I think we're all going to be in a learning curve for quite some time, but we've got better information than we have in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. John, you're on the vendor community here. You probably deal with quite a few partners and a pretty extensive supply chain, and you're a part of a supply chain for other vendors, I'm sure. So how, from the industry side of things, is this being addressed, and what more needs to be done? How much responsibility should be placed with the private industry?
Right. So CMMC is coming fast and furious, and every software vendor is honestly struggling a little bit with what level of responsibility, certification, et cetera, they truly need to reach for. All of our major vendors, Accenture, Dell, Deloitte, IBM, et cetera, who have large federal contracts, are putting forth the requirement about what software vendors need to achieve. But much of the language in CMMC doesn't necessarily fit for software vendors. So we're working as an industry group to try to make sure that we're spending our time wisely to improve the level of security within our core products, et cetera, without just wasting energy toward no improved end. Hope that makes sense. It's still a fuzzy gray area. We're excited about it, but still a few unknowns for us.
Yeah, and there has been some criticism in terms of how that policy was actually written for clarity. So that's probably worth noting. Jack, I'm going to jump to you on the same topic just because it's a very important one. And I have to imagine you have some thoughts. But for the supply chain, where should I don't even want to say liability, it sounds so harsh, but where's the responsibility lie? And, how does government address this correctly?
Well, the responsibility is shared. Certainly the government agency has the responsibility for doing due diligence in their supply chain, and the participants in their supply chain, should have accountability for their supply chains and of course their own operations and such. For me, though, the biggest concern and challenge is that as an industry, and I'm speaking from the security and risk management profession, that industry, I think we haven't done as good a job as we need to do to provide the right guidance and protocols and whatnot to all the organizations and regulations or standards, to all the organizations that are having to wrestle the third party beast. And there's a lot of reliance on self-reporting, and again, just my exposure, my experience has been that a lot of times the questions, the due diligence sorts of questions that are being asked of supply chain providers and whatnot, a lot of the questions that are being asked really aren't very useful from a risk management perspective. And there seems to be more an interest in asking every possible question than asking the right questions. And what happens then is that by itself just generates a ton of noise and wasted energy and effort, which again, as a profession, we can't afford waste. Our jobs are tough enough as it is, and when we sort of self-impose it through again, what I would characterize as not well-defined protocols and standards and whatnot, it isn't helping. So for me, I would encourage the industry to to step back and take another look at really what they're looking for from a risk information perspective from their supply chains.
Well, it's so funny you say that because I feel like we had these conversations years ago with FSMA and the statements that this was a paper pushing exercise. It wasn't achieving what ultimately was meant to be achieved. And now, here we are still trying to define the proper, standards for smaller vendors to meet to enable that. So it does seem we still have some ways to go. Royce, I'm going to jump to you. From your position, like feeling for you to feel secure in terms of the partnerships you have and the technology you have for ensuring your supply chain has the security in place, does that need to be baked into procurements? And hello, she's adorable. Or does that security, does it need to be kind of left to the vendors to resolve?
So since I've been at the VA for 3.5 years, I think supply chain, and I've been in the Intel DoD all my career, almost all my life, since probably 17, 18. I think supply chain risk management is important. I think it's important that the departments and agencies use the DoD and the Intel community as the exemplar for policies and standards that need to be put in place. One thing that the Intel community and the DoD has been very good at is making sure that their contracts, so their DD 254s, their security contract guidelines documents, are very detailed in expectations from a supply risk change management. I think it's critical that a partnership working group is stood up to look at what supply chain means on the department. And it's really huge on the healthcare side. I mean, coming from Intel, I know some folks be like, okay, is she paranoid? But when you come from an environment where you've seen and you've reported the things that can happen within your assets that you're purchasing, I think using them as your lead organization, looking at what worked well for them and the areas that where they had to reinvent. I would say probably over 10 years ago when I was in charge of security engineering, we started working, NSA started working with NIST and other partners throughout the DoD and Intel, and a lot with our vendors to conquer and understand where we need to go for supply. I say don't reinvent the wheel, but use the people who've been living it a lot longer to help us create those processes and those standards. I think we have to work closer as a healthcare organization more with FDA from a standards and ensuring that cybersecurity is embedded within our medical devices. I see our responsibility for protecting our veterans and their dependents and our patients as we saw it as fit when it came to protecting our national security. We don't want our system compromised. We don't want our patients' lives that put at stake because we didn't have the right precautions put in place. So I just think there's a lot we can learn from those who've been doing it for some time, but figure out a way to build that relationship with our vendors.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have one more question, and then I want you all to be thinking, because in the final 10 minutes, I want everybody to take a couple minutes to speak a bit about what you would call your number one and number two priorities for risk and compliance. What kind of, I don't want to use the phrase keeps you up at night as we always hear, but really what is the nearest term priority in terms of managing risk and security. But before I do that, I did want to I'm curious, and maybe this is the journalist of me that, is overthinking such scenarios, but I'm wondering if their systems are getting more targeted in this environment right now, whether, a perception of vulnerability is causing, bad players out there to try to take advantage. So John, looking at NRC, which certainly you all have a lot that you need to keep locked down. Has there been any tracking of the amount of targeting that has been happening of data, of systems externally? And what have you been seeing?
So it appeared that early on, many of the folks who were targeting our systems maybe also had an overreaction or a reaction to COVID. We saw a downturn actually at the very beginning in March of people targeting our systems and trying to get back in. That's since gone away, and we're back to pre-COVID levels of scanning and pinging of our systems. Phishing, I would say, has been a constant struggle, and that seems to be the most common and most tried mechanism for getting into our systems and targeting our data. And I would say we're probably not alone in that, reading reports to the CISO Council and in public news. So people are still trying to get in, people are still trying to target. And now that we've got folks at home working in maybe a less formal environment, see what I'm working in here, that maybe they're a little more relaxed in their approach to clicking on email, since everything is an email nowadays. But we've got a lot of education and awareness activities going on in our agency, and we're trying to keep that front of mind for folks. If something looks unusual during an email, call somebody, instant message them, try another modality to get in touch with them and see. So we that's where we're at.
Yeah, due diligence, I suppose, always. Jack, I'm going to ask you that too. We always see during tax season, you see all of the fake emails coming from IRS and so forth. Is there anything that we should keep in mind during this situation in terms of increased risk?
Yeah, well, the organizations that I've been working with have seen an increase in threat activity, particularly around phishing related to COVID and such. And, in terms of increased focus or attention, these kinds of situations, being able to focus on the things that matter most is really important. And unfortunately, especially in an environment like we're facing now, and when the bad actors intensify their efforts, we have an even bigger signal to noise problem from a intelligence and decision-making perspective than normal. So, being able to filter out the noise is in my view, the biggest challenge organizations have, so that they can really focus and prioritize on the things that matter most. And so for me, that's really what it boils down to.
Yeah, great. Well, in our final 5 minutes here, I would love to kind of just get a comment from each of the panelists in terms of top priority from your perspective in coming months to manage the security, manage the risk and compliance, what you're really focusing on right now. So, John, I'm going to return to you for NRC. Why don't you tell us kind of that top priority, and then we'll go down the line.
The top priority is to automate a lot of our compliance and risk activities so that we can quickly see the data, quickly make decisions, and try and figure out what the worst is, get that fixed first, and make sure we've got the appropriate risk questions bubbling up to our executives. The goal is to continue to secure our systems, ensure that folks have access, and we maybe want to simplify things, because we've been able to do stuff while we're not in the office, and maybe we can get that trend to continue and still get our good results.
Great. Okay, and Jack, I'm going to throw it to you. What should, from your perspective, be a top priority for everyone? You kind of hinted at a couple things a moment ago, but
yeah, I would say take the time to identify the loss event scenarios that are most relevant to your organization. Right? What are the events, the loss events that, if they occurred, would be the most traumatic to your organization? Identify those, because they provide the context for all of the other, or they should provide the context for all of the other risk decisions downstream that you're making, right? Nothing else we do as professionals, the policies we create, the processes we create and follow, the technologies we implement, and so on, even the people we hire, their only reason for existence from a risk management perspective is to help manage the likelihood and impact of these most important loss event scenarios. So if you take the time to identify what those loss event scenarios are, those risks, then you'll have covered a ton of ground in terms of reducing noise, because when you're dealing with some contingency, some missing patch or some supply chain question and whatnot, you can evaluate that issue within the context of, right, how relevant is it to this, what is undoubtedly a relatively short list of most critical loss event scenarios, and that can really help streamline your problem space.
Great, terrific. Royce, top priority right now in these challenging times.
So our top priority is to continue to support the Secretary's priority, and that's to ensure that improve the veterans' experience and make sure that everything that they need is at their fingertip. My organization top priority is to begin leveraging our threat information and data more into our risk assessments, and to begin to develop a collaborative, increase our workflows between my organization and our cyber operations organization, so that when we architect or we develop these standards, we've fully taken advantage of the information that we know that is out there as it relates to threat. Continue to incorporate MITRE's and NSA attack framework into our architecture design, and to continue to work with our partner organization to reduce our material weaknesses.
Great. And final thought from you, John, as a vendor working with the customers. What is your top priority right now?
Yeah, honestly, across the federal government, our focus over the next, 3 to 12 months is to really just help them understand, work with us to understand what their true problems are and priorities, and help them understand how the software that they already have probably can be enhanced, extended, or we can develop patches to deliver additional functionality rather than go buy more tools. So that's our highest.
Great. Well, first, I want to thank the panel so much. This was a really terrific discussion, extremely timely, needless to say. I do want to encourage the audience to visit some of the partner booths at the end. And I want to thank everyone for having me. And I believe we're cutting now. We have a little video for folks.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tom Suter. I'm the founder of the Advanced Technology Academic Research Center. And with us today, we got John Fenge, who's the CTO of Micro Focus Government Solutions. How are you doing today, John?
Doing great.
Thanks for joining us. Looking forward to your talk.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining me today. Zero outage is our topic. It's a new strategy to deliver more cost-effective DevSecOps today. And I want to spend some time talking with you about what it is, where it came from, how you can apply it today. The zero outage concept aligns directly with security by design for delivering and evolving IT. It is proven to reduce dev time and support costs, improve responsiveness to mission needs, and reduce the inherent security risks in dev and operations. So today we're going to talk about the standard itself, where it came from, the key focus areas, goals and benefits for you and your organization, and then where you can start. So zero outage industry standard has evolved from a number of things, including Porter's value chain, as well as most recently the open groups IT for IT, which you see here on the left, and the zero outage model on the right. So IT for IT is really focused on what IT should operationally be doing to ensure a holistic view to support the enterprise, which is helpful for budget justifications, but it's not ideal. It doesn't tell you how. Zero outage industry standard bridges that gap. It tells you how to transform your IT organization efficiently to reduce outage and security breaches. So who's using it? Many large players, they tend to be heavy on the infrastructure side where 4.9's responsiveness and reliability is required. It's heavier from adoption in Europe, although we have some federal agency customers and some large systems integrators working with us right now on some major programs. So you will see more of it. So what are the key goals and benefits? Why should you care? You know, you may not find a lot of excitement with your agency leadership and system owners if you want to request more headcount for your security teams or to purchase additional software licenses or new tools. But you probably will get a lot of interest and excitement if you can talk about fewer outages, faster deployments, lower manpower costs. And that's the key. If you focus your stakeholders and budget keepers on reducing outages, et cetera, you'll get beyond just explaining the latest breach, remediation, and how it won't happen next time. There's 3 basic short-term key goals you can pursue to begin the zero outage concept in your agency. First, reusable components. Think of Legos for IT. Easy examples are identity as a service, security as a service, and now the big buzzword is microservices. Simply put, the more reuse, the fewer lines of unique code and possible security risks. Second, end-to-end DevOps, consistently applied as process and tools throughout your organization so that developers can move from team to team and have a common set of tools and processes to understand how to be efficient and effective as soon as they make a change to a different program. And then finally, number 3, situational awareness and automation. This is a slightly nuanced arena related to the fact that identity management is not just about the individual unique person, it's the situation within your organization, how they're using systems, et cetera. All right, so ZOIS comes down to really 5 things: security, architecture, people, platform, and process. So I'm going to talk through these fairly quickly, but I am going to offer you for each one some specific things that you can do now that are relevant to achieving outage reduction, i.e. towards the goal of zero outage. First, security. You know, beyond the basics of CDM, which is being rolled out and implemented fairly well and aggressively within the federal government, are people and new software. We'll talk about people in a minute, but let's talk about software first, specifically DevSecOps. Implementing a standard CI/CD process with SAST, DAST, and RASP is the fastest and least expensive way to reduce outages and breaches in your organization. This overcomes the challenge of never having enough security expertise or budget to hire the right expertise, and it enables developers much faster feedback and much faster remediation of security risks within the software itself. And the time and labor savings from improved developer efficiency alone, just that, typically pays for any software cost because the developers are just that much more efficient and there's shorter outages and downtimes. Your mission owners will thank you, I promise, as their projects will deliver faster because you are identifying for them and fixing security issues earlier throughout the dev cycle rather than waiting for the ATO process and having to go back through the entire development cycle again. Moving on to architecture, for the top 3 or 4 services and functions that you have within your entire system organization, what you may find is that there are some very common functions which could be automated. Again, not automated, standardized. An easy one is identity as a service, and there are solutions out there right now which we, as an example, as well as other software vendors, are deploying into federal to achieve that level of capability. Next is people. The biggest challenge, obviously, with people is the shortage of the qualified personnel who are trained on specific tools and their ability to rapidly engage with teams as they're rolled onto and off of. So ZOIS focuses on 2 key things: greater and more accurate automation to help those individuals, those people on the teams be more efficient, and increasing standardization of your CI/CD and DevSecOps processes throughout the agency, typically starting with the most critical and/or largest systems first. With regard to platform, so security and capacity are typically the 2 top reasons for outages, as I'm sure you would agree. We've talked about end-to-end security, so let's consider the platform capacity. In ZOIS, platforms independent of whatever the deployment and operational model is, on-prem, cloud, or a hybrid. ZOIS emphasizes the building block model that can comprise several components that may span actually different types of hybrid environments. Comment on platform. The age-old concept of network quality of service, QoS, can be applied very well to your platform components, extending to different price points, response timelines, redundancy, and that would be carried forward through your back billing or charge out to your different systems so that they can pay for the responsiveness and recovery and redundancy they need. Consider that when you're talking about platforms. Finally, process. Again, back to the ZOIS framework, automated and standardized runbooks, which documents the activities to be performed, their corresponding timelines, and the times when decisions are made are the core of the ZOIS focus. So things like what decisions should be taken at the start, the point of no return, the back out, et cetera. In addition, identifying and maintaining the list of qualified teams and team members to perform the tasks in an emergency or an urgent situation is a critical step in achieving a ZOIS zero outage goal. So where can you start? First of all, thank you so much for the time today. Hopefully this presentation has at least made you aware of an alternative to justify your upcoming investments to your leadership and program owners. You probably know that your agencies will be spending a lot more money in various ways based on the new realities of work from home, remote credentialing capability, scalability, et cetera. With the ZOIS framework, you can help make sure those new investments are not just fixing the existing problems, but enabling you and teeing you up for higher reliability, redundancy, and reduced outages in the future. If you want to take the next steps, I've got a couple of really easy ones for you. First off, join ZOIS. It's free through the end of 2020. Just hit zerooutage.com, which you see on the screen here. And as part of that, you're going to get access to a lot more content, information, and perspectives on how to actually achieve outage reductions. Finally, easy first step is to do a ZOIS assessment on an upcoming or challenging system and area. And I believe, and hopefully you will see that, adding the ZOIS perspective to the investment plan and system planning will make the difference. Thank you.
Thank you, John. That was very informative. I actually learned quite a bit. That was, I think our audience is going to appreciate that. So that was John Fengi, CTO of Micro Focus Government Solutions. And thank you, audience, for your time. And now on to the rest of your day.